welcome to FPTV and welcome to a very special edition of FPTV New Releases. It's my pleasure to introduce #1 New York Times best-selling author, Mr. Ridley Pearson. Yay! The author of the Kingdom Keepers series and the Peter Pan prequels that began with Peter and the Starcatchers. And with him, we've got super artist Ile Gonzalez, the super talented artist of Made Fire's The Heroes Club. How are you both?
I'm doing fine.
Doing great, thank you.
It's good. Thanks so much for joining us, guys. And we're here to, we've got a special event to talk about your new series of graphic novels for DC. It's three graphic novel sequence for a classic DC property, actually reimagined, the Super Sons. And we're here to talk about those three books: the POLARSHIELD Project, the FOXGLOVE Mission, and Escape to LANDIS. These are all available with signed mini prints exclusively from Forbidden Planet, signed by the guys here, which we appreciate very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Could you take myself and the FP Massive through how this project came to be and how you both got involved?
Sure. I had, as you mentioned, I'd been part of co-writing Peter and the Starcatchers, that series, and the Kingdom Keepers series, which is about 5 kids who get inside the Disney universe after dark. And one that was for Disney. Both of those were for Disney, and one of the people who worked for Disney was a fine woman named Michelle Wells. And Michelle Wells eventually found herself at DC Entertainment, and DC had this wonderful notion that after years and years and years and years of comic books, perhaps they should use some of their characters in graphic novels aimed at younger readers. And I think part of this was self-survival. It would bring in a new generation of readers into their comics. But it was also altruistic in that it's many studies have shown that graphic novels help reluctant readers into chapter reading and beyond. So it's a really terrific educational tool, and that's something that's dear to my heart and dear to Ile's. Ile was a teacher, and I'm currently a professor at Boise State University. But I think they came to me in part because they had Super Sons in mind for me, which is a wildly successful comic series for them and beautifully done. And they wanted to age it down. And I said, well, I'm honored to be asked, but I'm not by any means a DC comic expert, and I've never written a graphic novel. And they said, oh, you're perfect. And so I said, why? And because we want to reimagine it. We want to start all over. And the fact that you've never done this before, we know you've written movie and TV scripts, and these are written in script form, so it shouldn't be that huge a challenge for you. And they gave me the wonderful Ben Abernathy and Michelle as my editors. And they were great and lucky enough to secure Ile Gonzalez, who is here today.
His artwork is fantastic.
She's just unbelievable. And so I had a very steep learning curve. Ile had done this before, so I think, she was much more the expert than I. And as I waded into this, I was text heavy at first, and then I realized that these scripts are a flip of what it is you do for TV and film, where there's very little description and a ton of dialogue. And in graphic novels, I mean, there's 700 panels in these 144-page books. And, one panel for me, I might write a page and a half or 2 pages of description, trying to give Ile the tools I think she might need to tell the story correctly. And Ile, being something of a veteran of this, would, send back a layout. And we're going to show some of this in a few minutes, but she would send back a layout that wasn't exactly what I had described, but I looked at it and thought, oh, this is way better. And then she would send me the colorized, and I go, oh, this is way better. So, it's just been it's been a terrific partnership, both with DC and with Ile. And the books have been hugely successful, which we're grateful to the DC universe for. And we're getting kids reading. I mean, I get these wonderful emails from parents saying, thank you for writing these books because little Billy or little Jilly has suddenly started reading. So, you know, it's just a win-win on all sides.
I mean, that's wonderful. I mean, I think one of the great things about the comic book medium, and this is certainly my experience as a veteran comic book fan, and most of the people I've ever known ever worked with words, or the journalists I've worked with over the years, you know, comic books are a great gateway into literacy and into reading. And I think, you know, grabbing that audience in the way that you are right now with this book, such an important thing to do. Yeah, both in terms of propagating the medium and in terms of the habits it gives people for absorbing information and reading. And I think it's a beautiful way into that. You touched upon before. Oh, sorry, Ridley. Yeah, please carry on.
So I was about a third of the way into the first book.
Yeah.
And Ile was scratching out layouts. And I was still trying to find my way through this process. And I'm a big researcher, so I read about a dozen graphic novels, and one of them, I don't know if you've read it, Andrew, was called Amulet.
Yeah, right on.
I read Amulet, and my jaw dropped. I actually wrote my editors, and I said, "Oh, these are graphic novels."
Yeah.
You know, it suddenly occurred to me that it was actually Ile's job to tell the story. And that if I absolutely had to, I could put some text into some people's mouths. But it radically, reading Amulet and seeing page after page after page of zero text, and the story was moving rapid fire through the book. I went, okay, now I realize I gotta way up those descriptions and damp down the text and let these be graphic novels. And it was a fabulous turning point for me.
Fantastic. I mean, that really is wonderful. And to touch upon what you've just the topic you've just opened up, which is your working relationship and how you put these books together. Can you talk us through that, please, mate?
Sure. And Ile, why don't we go from your side, and then I will fill in. Given that you've got a scratchy voice today because you're not feeling great, but
I'm here.
Yes.
Well, Ridley will send in the script, and the editor will send it to me. And I was told, like, this is sometimes, I don't know, I thought they was the final script, but then I was sent another one. But it's usually the changes you made were mostly about speech. Like, you already have the image in your mind of how things had to go along the way. And so I had to draw that, but I had to do it pretty fast because it was 100 and some pages book. So I had to make like 15 layouts per week. I mean, I was told to do 30, but sometimes I couldn't, because thinking about how the page should look, that's the hard part. So
Yeah.
I had to
Andrew,
make
she was
schedules.
working 6 days a week, 10 hours a day.
Yeah,
to
for
get these books done.
the first book was like, we need this now. So I was working like Monday to Saturday non-stopping, and sometimes I just split the work from Saturday to Sunday. Like, I'm just gonna rest a bit and just work the entire weekend. But it was fun, and then I got used to it. And when we stopped and we had to do the second book, it was like, what am I gonna do now?
Yeah.
I'm so used to work so much, and now I'm just resting, and I didn't know what to do.
Yeah. What's the page count on the books, guys?
There are 144 pages.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a big chunk
So
of work.
they're about 700 images, between 550 and 700 images. And some of this was a very ambitious program on DC's part. And they have many, many books in the pipeline. And some of those authors speak directly to the illustrator. I did not. For whatever, they probably gauged that I was way too loose a cannon. And so I had to go through the editor, and then the editor went to Ile. But what just totally amazed me about this world we live in is that Ile and I worked for 3 years together, whatever 144, let's see, that's times 3, that's what, 440 pages of books together, and we had never met until last Tuesday.
Amazing.
And I met her virtually last Tuesday. We had sneaked in. I don't think DC ever knew this, but we had figured out how to WhatsApp each other.
Yeah.
And in big moments of panic, I would write Ile and go, "What am I doing here?" You know, and she'd write back, "Stay calm. It's going to be all right." You know, but there were very few of even the WhatsApps. And then all of a sudden, you know, up on a Zoom about a week ago, I went, "Ile, it's you." But meanwhile, we'd written 3 books together. So it's just a new world.
That's amazing. That's it, and really, that's a fascinating thing about the world in which we all live and work today.
My gosh,
it is amazing.
Yeah, it's truly amazing.
Yeah, and so please, in terms of all the work that it invested in the art, what would you say? How would you get into describing your involvement and how it all coalesced, actually, Ridley, how it all came together as that joint production between the two of you?
DC wanted a reimagining of all of this. And I was lucky enough to have Ben Abernathy as one of my editors, because Ben is basically an encyclopedia of DC history. And I was not, you know, and I really believe in my adult and my middle grade novels. I really believe in making setting a character. I think it's really important that this book can only take place here. It, you know, like if I write a crime novel that's set in Seattle, it can't happen in Indianapolis. And there has to be a reason for that. Besides, there's no crime in Indianapolis. But so the first thing I wanted to do was imagine a world. And I just looked ahead. I do a lot of research into climate change, and I was looking ahead 10 or so years, and I thought, well, you know what? The world we're in is that Gotham is flooding. That whole coast is flooding, and people are moving inland. And as they move inland and arrive to cities like Chicago, which I called Windermere in my novel, in these novels, that they are treated as uninvited immigrants. And so I could get into the immigrant social issues and into environmental issues without banging you over the head with them, but give readers something to learn about as they go. I mentioned earlier that one of the great rewards is hearing from parents. And very early on, after POLARSHIELD Project was published, I got an email from a father who said, you know, my son was up busily reading through your book 2 or 3 times. And then lo and behold, he came downstairs and asked me a question about climate change. And we spoke for 2 hours. Wow. And he said, that's the longest conversation I've had with my son in 3 years. So, you know, you can do this stuff.
Yeah.
So I knew that they briefed me on who Ian was. Ian in my book is Damien, but I grew up in the world of horror movies using Damien as these weird creatures. And the DC lore had Damien as a child assassin, and I just wasn't going to go there. I said, that's not something I ever want to get behind, as a child assassin. So I renamed him Ian, just taking a few letters out of his name. And then I was given John, who was the son of Lois Lane and Clark Kent. And I have 2 daughters, and they're kick-ass daughters. And I really did not want to write just a 2-boy super sons thing. I wanted to have a young woman in this. And we have an adopted son from Kenya. And so I thought, wow, what if I could bring a young woman in this who's from a land like Africa, which I would call Landis, and that she would have some legacy. And I thought, well, what could be that legacy? So I started digging into women warriors in Africa. And it turns out that 1,300 years ago, there was a group in Nubia. There was a tribe that had mostly women warriors and was always led by a woman named Candace. And that name was passed down daughter after daughter. It was a maternal society. And these warriors were so tough that when the Romans invaded Egypt, they got in boats, went up the Nile, and drove the Romans out of Egypt. This is history. And I just went, oh my gosh, Well, then I've got a young woman named Candace, and she's in Landis and has no idea of this legacy that she is descendant from. And I started to world build. And then the cool thing is, you know, putting this into description, which sometimes was very detailed about the world, but was less detailed about the characters. And then turning it over to Ile, and I would see who these characters were. And it's just magical, Andrew. It's, you write some words on a page, and then you get this layout, which doesn't really show you anything. And then Ile colorizes it, and you go, oh my gosh, it's Candace, or it's John. You know, I mean, it's simply marvelous. It's just wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, that's the spectacular alchemy of comic book creation, which is really like any other form of like creative expression. I mean, it is completely a partnership, but I imagine it's such a thrill to see your words be interpreted visually, and the reality of that process as Ile's creating those pages. That must feel incredible to see that happen.
It's just unreal, you know. It literally is unreal, and to see the work that Ile puts into it, you know. One of the things we're going to show is how many covers we went through, full color covers, and then DC would decide, oh no, let's try another one, and Ile would go, oh my gosh, and start all over. You know, it's an editorial process, and I think one thing we try to get across to students is that you never do these things right. You know, you do them as best you can. But you make mistakes all the way through. I make mistakes, Ile makes mistakes, and our partnership is to get through those mistakes with a better solution as well as we can in the time that we have. And as Ile said, we have been under a huge time pressure on this. And it's another reason I think DC asked me to do this series was I'm very fast. And I think they knew I was fast. And they wanted to get it out and get it out now. And they said the whole thing is the illustrators can take 3 years, you know. So we don't know, and we're going to look around. And then they found Ile, and Ile said, "Oh, I'll work my tail off on this, and we'll get it done." And she did. It's just unbelievable.
That's amazing. I mean, of course, you know, one of the greats, one of the comic book greats who created some significant characters for DC, and touched upon an earlier incarnation of Super Sons at one point was Jack Kirby, and he was famously very prolific. You know, a guy who could turn pages around really quickly. And in fact, the original Super Sons artist is a guy called Dick Dillon, and Dick Dillon was one of the Super Sons in its first incarnation was created by Bob Haney and Dick Dillon. Dick Dillon, who'd done Justice League of America throughout the 60s, was famously one of the fastest DC artists ever. So there's this pantheon of artists who've been involved with these characters that you're very much creating in the footsteps of Ile. And it's funny that you should be in a situation where, you know, you had that time pressure to speed up your own turnaround and work, which is what these guys back in the day, 40 years ago, were notorious for. I think it's an interesting parallel. Now that we're talking about this, do you think you could show us some of your presentation and take us through that creative process? Yeah.
We'll walk you through this quickly. I'm going to share screen here and hope everything's working. So this is the final cover, the cover that's now on sale as Escape to Landis. And I think what both, I mean, Ile knew more about this than I, but what I discovered is, you know, that a graphic novel is where art and words meld into this particular look and to tell a story. So on the left here is what I call my blue sky outlines. And I do 3 or 4 sentences that may cover 10 pages. And I run that by my editor, and we work on that over and over and over before I take the step into Andrew. I don't know, but you know, a drinking straw when you're out at a restaurant, it comes in a little paper thing, and if you squish it together and you have young kids, you can take that off and put a drop of water on it, and it grows out like an accordion. And that's how outlining is, and a little bit like Ile's layouts are as well. So on the left is the blue sky, and on the right is the next iteration, which is still, if you see, it says page 1 through 9. John is watching his father, it's still pretty vague. And then from that on the left, now we get, instead of page 1 through 9, on the right is just a particular panel in the book that Ile is going to read and have to make into an illustration.
Yeah.
And so it's like a half a page of, my description of right down to what a logo on a building is going to look like.
Right.
And poor Ile has to deal with my nonsense. And here's our lovely Ile.
Yeah, fantastic.
This is what we receive, we, DC, and me, from Ile, from that paragraph I wrote.
Yeah.
And until you've done this for 6 months, at least for me, until I had done this for 5 or 6 months, I couldn't really read these very well. And my mother was an illustrator, so I should have been able to. But I would see this and go, yeah, I think I see what's going on here. But what about this? What about? And Ile would write back through DC and say, no, just hang on, because I'm going to show you. And then we would get this. And then my jaw would drop.
That's lovely.
Because now you see, and Ile, this is what's called a spread. So, Andrew, for those who don't know, in a graphic novel, sometimes you have 3 pieces of art on a page, sometimes 4 or 5, and every now and then the story or the character demands a bigger moment. It's not even about being a close-up. It's about really just sort of punching the reader in the face. Yeah. And so what Ile's showing you there is what's called a spread, which means it's 2 pages to do a single piece. If it's a single, it's called a splash. But so very early in the book, we have a spread. And Ile, you may want to talk about that.
Well, yeah, this is a big moment. It's also the introduction, so it has to be like very big and like, oh my God, what's going on? So that the kids see this and they go like, oh, I want to know more. What's going on? Why is Superman there? Why are there so many people? This is Metropolis. What happened? So it has to be big to attract attention.
Yeah, it's a beautiful widescreen image actually, and it's very arresting.
Isn't it just incredible?
It's great.
Yeah, it's just phenomenal. Incredible. So this is the trilogy of books, and on the right is the newest. And all story starts with character. If you do it out of just plot, I'm a huge plotter, but if you do it out of just plot, it's going to be boring. You have to engage the reader in someone's life, even if that's a rabbit or a gerbil. Yeah. And so with these books, we knew we were starting with the son of Batman and the son of Superman. And one of the great WhatsApps I got from Ile was, I have been dreaming about drawing Batman and Superman all my life, and now I get to do it. Which I can totally relate to. And she did a beautiful job. So Ian Wayne has no superpowers, but he's wealthy because his dad is wealthy. And when he goes to put a costume together, I think my instruction in my little writing up of the panel was he's just gone into his closet and gotten whatever he could. Yeah. And then Ile delivers on the right. And, she has somebody, and I think he's got like hockey knee pads on and skateboarding wristbands. And, it's just a great amalgam of what you could find in a house to sort of build a superhero look. And then John Kent is indeed the son of Lois Lane and Superman. But think about that for a moment. As a young man who had his father issues myself, poor John Kent is not going to be able to fly, and he's not going to be able to bend steel in his bare hands or repel bullets because he's only half Superman. Yeah. And he has this inborn feeling that he's always going to let his dad down because he can't be as cool and great as his dad. And it's just punishing him as he gets into adolescence of God, I'm just never going to be what my dad wants me to be. How am I going to get through this world? And so Ile has the responsibility to sort of make him look surprised and almost traumatized at times, as well as strong, and confident. Now, how you do that, Ile, as an artist, I have no idea, but you managed to do it.
That's great. That's great.
And this is
yeah,
Candace,
here we go.
with the legacy of being maybe fifth in line to this wonderful group of women warriors. She has been hidden in the Americas, which is called Columbria in our books. And because they wanted to make sure she could mature to the age of being that empress. And she is a young woman on a really wonderful character arc, and she has no idea what that arc is. She doesn't know that she's going to start to gain some superpowers. She doesn't really know where she comes from. And in this final book that we're here talking about now, she finally goes to Landis, both in search of her legacy and to stop a very horrible thing from happening. And Tilly is just an interesting example of this happens in fiction all the time, where in outline form, an outline is a blueprint, but it's with very fuzzy lines. And Tilly was supposed to be in this book in like 2 library scenes, and in the first book. And I liked her so much, and the editors liked her so much, and Ile did such an amazing job of giving this sort of heartwarming, sympathetic character to her, that she not only shows up more in book 1, but all of book 2, and then is a big hero in book 3. So it's one of those wonderful, unexpected things in fiction where a character, and I always thought that was so stuffy, kind of like, oh, the character writes the book, but the characters demand more ink than you thought you were going to give them. And you're an idiot if you don't at least try to give them what they're asking for. And Tilly turned out to be this really wonderful character that we all adore. And we had to give her a super costume. So I looked up some really weird Halloween costumes, and I found something called Puppet Face. And then I said to Ile, I don't know if you can pull this off, but can we put this onto Tilly? And look at what she managed to do. So if that doesn't scare you, Andrew, I don't know what talk about what you were going for in this.
Yes, well, she needed to look scary, and she needed to look different because that's a costume, and she was trying to hide from people that might harm her or her family. And this is a fun look she came up with, but that took everyone by surprise, because even the kids, when they see her, they're like, oh my God, what is this? She's crazy. But it's fun.
Yeah, it's really fun.
No, it's wonderful.
And then we have a gang leader, Avarice, again, who has a really snarky, an Ile-induced menace that I just adore. She's through all three books, and can really be awful. And we wanted to. Candace is part of 5 young women, any one of whom could have been the future empress of Landis. And we went through several iterations of who the other 4 would be, because they're threatening and challenging to Candace throughout the series, both in that they feel they could be this person, and they're also wary of who is this girl we don't know.
Yes.
So Ile and I went back and forth, and we both did a lot of research, and we decided to pull characters from Africa from many different regions. And so Ile went to Kenya, Libya, Congo, and South Africa. And when she colorized them, they all came to life. Different hairdos for the regions, different colors in the regions, and different costumes in the regions.
Yeah, they look lovely. They look lovely with the
and I
the
just
colours.
love these gals.
Yeah.
And one of them is almost a double agent in that she early on really likes Candace and thinks she'll help her. The others are pretty strident and rough about the fact that they're not going to trust her until they have a reason to trust her. So it just gives her yet another character complication and conflict. And the setting, as I mentioned, is in the world of climate disruption and climate change. So cities are flooding, rivers are overflowing, bridges are breaking, isolating people. And Ile just does such a great job of showing us rather than me having to tell you.
Yeah.
And then the wonderful exodus from these giant metropolis areas inland, leading us with these social conflicts of, you know, this sort of disgusting name that the immigrants are called are flood runners.
Right,
And if you're called a flood runner, it's a really denigrating name. And how this stuff comes up in middle school so often, everybody wants to label everybody something, and it's so unfair. And then this, Ile, you can walk us through this, but this is what gets me about doing these books, Andrew, is, you know, Ile will put 30 hours in on a cover, and then on a whim, the editor goes, oh no, I think it ought to have another look. So
Yeah.
Ile, walk us through what we're looking at here.
Yeah, so the one on the left was like the first cover we had. Like I really
Yes.
liked it, and initially it actually had Superman and Batman like shadows in the background, but it was like, no, we have to take that out because we need to put the name. And then I colored it because I really liked it, and we actually changed poses a bit and costumes. And then it was like, no, we're not gonna do that. We're gonna do something with water then. So I had to make more sketches, like
Yeah.
different. The one on the right is the final one, but that was not like the only sketch I did. I did several.
Oh no.
And those went through a round of like, maybe this, maybe add that, maybe a little bit of this. And that's how we got the first cover.
Yeah.
And you can see they're just completely different.
Yes,
you know, the
absolutely.
two boys alone, the two boys with Superman and Batman. Oh, the two boys with Candace, you know, in water.
Also,
but you can imagine the time these took.
Yeah, also I just remember that the cover for the book, I think it came first than what we did in the book. So
Yes.
I didn't have like an idea of exactly what was
Okay.
going to happen in
Yeah.
the entire book. So that's why I did the one on the left, like, oh, there's the Super Sons, so they're kids, and so I'm gonna put like a shadow of Batman and Superman over there because they want to be like their fathers. But we had to change that because the story wasn't exactly about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You mean I didn't mention them enough? And so here is a typical layout that Ile would send. It's just sort of a pen and ink, quick rendering. Didn't you have to do something like 15 of these a week, Ile? And then you did one colored page per day or something?
Yes, we had to move fast for the books because
just amazing.
we didn't want the kids to like forget about the books, so we had to work fast.
And this is an actual layout from the third book. There's a meeting between John and Tilly and a man named Mr. Mylark who has secrets for them. And they're up on, in the United States, there's a thing called the Washington Monument, which is a huge, almost Egyptian obelisk that you're probably familiar with. And in this case, where in this other world, it's called the Hands of Unity. And it's of equal height. It's probably 100, 110 feet high. And so this is a terrace up on the Hands of Unity. And then Ile sends us the color. And then as I wrote more panels, Ile moves the camera in tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. And it's something as a reader, you probably don't notice. But to us, it's a way to make sure the importance of each panel is increased as we go down the page.
Sure.
So this is kind of a medium shot, and then she goes to a medium shot on Mr. Mylark and the two kids. Then the camera flips and we're looking over Mylark's shoulder at the two kids. These are just, I just love this. Then we look down off the terrace so that we get a perspective of how high we are. And there's kind of a funny story here, which is a funny story on me. But Ile, if you'll tell it, I will confess to it.
Yes. Okay. So this monument was in book 2 as well.
Yeah.
And on that first description, there was no walkway through, like in the monument. So when book 3 happened and I had to do this, I was like, oh my God, I had already drawn this. And they were like, yeah, this is already done. So I had to like sort of move things around a bit so that it makes sense that there was a walkway over there. So
Yeah.
I had to.
What she's politely saying is the writer lost his way and reinvented this thing a book later.
So you had to cheat physics slightly to get what you needed.
No, it's just like there was just one shot of the monument like this,
Yeah.
and if I wanted to make like the walkway here, but the shot was already done. It was like, oh, okay, so I'm just gonna put it like on the back.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Just a quick solution to an unsolvable thing, and then we get a close up of John and Tilly and these wonderful expression marks. Illy calls them exclamation points, but that immediately draw the reader's attention primarily to Tilly. And what's even more interesting to me as the writer is at this point, Illy decides that this is so important, we're also going to drop out the whole background so that the focus is just on the kids. And unless she explains that to you, you don't really even know it. This is John pointing down to that distraction. But we can show you, and now talk about this moment, Illy, actually, before I go to the full page.
Well, this is a moment before action happens. This is something is about to happen, so I needed to just emphasize that. And so I dropped the background and did the red lines in the background, like just gonna grab these two people. Something's about to happen. And that
you can see
for the next
John,
panel.
that John is holding both Mr. Mylark and Tilly at this point.
Yeah.
And what readers may not see, but boy did I as the writer, is that one of Tilly's arcs, because she feels a little excluded from this group, is to eventually feel like she's part of this team and a needed part of this team. And this is the first panel in all the books, really, where we see how affectionate she feels toward John as a friend. It's really a dear moment between those two. And Illy chooses to do it in this moment of hyper action so that we don't dwell on it, but if you look, it's there, which I think, again, shows you the role of the illustrator and how they're thinking of many things at once. And then finally they jump. John jumps them. He can't fly, but he can jump, and he jumps them up to the top of the monument. And Illy demonstrates this with a blue line from the terrace up. And we still see on the lower left, we still see those exclamation points of the people being distracted and looking over. So there are all these subtle little things that Illy's thinking about that maybe as the writer, I'm not, but she's thinking, oh, fine, Ridley, he jumps him up to the top of this thing, but how do I actually show that? And does just a brilliant job. And here are those 2 pages laid out, where at the top we have a medium shot, we get closer, then we have that one distraction far away, and then in the bottom right, we have no background. So it's really focused on what Tilly's saying. And then the 3 where John is distracting everyone in the upper left, then he's holding on to Mylark, and we get the affectionate moment from Tilly, and finally the big jump.
Yeah, that's great. That's lovely seeing it all come together like that.
Yeah. And here is a splash page that Illy can tell us about.
Yes, this has to be a splash page because it was the moment when Ian realizes that John might be hiding something, like he's super strong and he just saved Ian. So it had to be a big page, a big moment.
Yeah.
So we're looking over Ian's shoulder, and there are all these action lines focusing in, and it's like, where did this meek little boy come up with this strength? And suddenly Ian knows this is not any normal kid. And likewise, our villain, Avarice, has this moment near the end of the book where Illy uses red for power and this big, broad pose to just show how overpowering avarice is and how everyone must give her their full attention. I loved this moment because it's almost like a bodybuilder doing one of those big flexes, you know. Avarice is just saying, dudes, I am in charge, so look out, you know. And these are really the three arcs that Candace is out to prove herself as a legitimate empress. John and Ian have to stop a killer virus. And believe me, 3 years ago, we had no idea COVID was coming. And that Tilly, now being part of all of this, has to turn her energies into rescuing Ian and John. Because as you know, Andrew, there's a much deeper history to Ian in the DC lore that they let me in on the first book. And I wanted to make sure we were set up for another series. So a very villainous character who happens to be related to Ian shows up in the third book. And Tilly is aware that something big is coming and has to sort of take it upon herself to save everyone.
Yeah, fantastic.
So that's that.
That's lovely. It's always so interesting. Thank you for taking us through that process. It's always so interesting to see how things evolve from your initial ideas into your final expression on the page with the two of you working together. That was great. Have you guys got time for a few questions that have come up?
Absolutely. And it's, you know, one thing I wanted to say is that we, in Peter and the Starcatchers and the Kingdom Keepers, and now also in Super Sons, one of the emphasis is on team play, that any one of us may not have an answer, but if we're willing to work, if we're willing to have humility and be wrong about things and work with others, a team can often accomplish something. And the Super Sons and their friends certainly learn that and get much stronger as a result of that. But you know, metaphorically, that's also what happens in writing a graphic novel, because there's, you know, a writer in Idaho and an illustrator in Mexico and two editors in LA and you know, unknown letterers and all sorts of production people. And without any one of those, this doesn't happen. It's totally a team effort. And it's such a privilege and really a blast to work with really fun, creative people. You know, there are frustrations when somebody says you can't do that. You really want to do it. But part of figuring out how to do a better project is to say, but okay, I won't do that. Let's not do that and move on. And Ile had those moments. I had those moments. But we feel we've come out with a really fun project. Yeah,
fantastic. That again, thanks for sharing that with us. I feel that one of the questions that came up quite a lot, you answered quite comprehensively during the course of your talk, and that was for you, Ridley, what the key difference is between writing a novel and writing a comic series is.
Yeah, and I think it's several fold. I mean, when you write a film or TV script, you definitely see the image in your head. And that is true in a graphic novel as well. But one of the huge challenges, and Ile speaks of this so well, is that if you're doing an action scene in a book where the prose continues and continues, I can take 15 pages if I want for an action scene. Ile and I have 4 or 5 images to convey an action scene. So you really have to think through, where do you want the camera? Whom do you want to see? What are they doing? Because, I mean, Amulet shows this so well. I mean, he or she can take 3 pages and move you through a huge action scene, but you're missing most of it. And so Ile and I have to sort of figure out, you know, since the reader isn't going to know what they're missing, how do we make sure that we grab them and move them at the appropriate moment through this? Because if we blow it, they're going to get lost.
Yeah.
So it's a very complex process.
Yes. Yeah. No, I hear you. And Ile, for you, what's been the key difference between working on Super Sons and working on the Heroes Club?
Well, this is more of a traditional media, and Made Fire was more like a movement. So it wasn't really animation because I didn't animate anything. I just did the images. But for example, if I had to do a background, I had to do the entire background. And then the characters, and if they move, I had to do another scene. So it was like setting up, was more like a movie, more or less. So you had like an animated movie, like you had the background and then the characters, and if there's something like on the foreground, like something there. So I had to change that for Super Sons. I actually have done like comics like this, but like for myself before. So when I went to Mayfire, that's when I had to change everything. This is more traditional art, and I already knew how to do that. So it was like coming back to an old friend.
Yeah, yes, that makes a lot of sense, because what you're able to do in a straight comic book is, for want of a better description, direct people's emotions. So in the panels you've just been showing us with the accents, with around the characters, the white background on the emotional accents, you're making the reader, you're funneling the reader into thinking that. Whereas if it's in a movie, if it's in those animated Mayfire backgrounds, you can't use those tricks in the same way. That's really interesting, and something that your background is in addition to in addition to being a comic creator, your background's in fashion, right, Ile?
Yeah, I study fashion design.
Yeah, so basically, one of the questions that we were asked is, given that you've got that heavy fashion background in addition to your illustrated work, who were your influences in terms of comic creators? Which comic creators really spoke to you and have been your favorites?
Oh my God, I love Adam Hughes. I love
He's
the
great,
femininity.
man. He's the best. Yeah,
I love the femininity in his images. I just like, I was studying fashion design and I wanted to like sew the costumes, like have them on me. I don't know, it's just so feminine and beautiful.
Yeah, that's a great answer. He's really got a great eye for that stuff. And how about yourself, Ridley? Who are your heroes within the comic book form, or whose work have you enjoyed?
As I say, I don't have much experience. My brother was a huge comic book reader, and they were lying around the house, and I looked at them, but I was more of a chapter reader at that point. And when I came to the graphic novels, I really loved this one by oh gosh, am I going to forget her name? But the name of the book is Nimona, and it's a wonderful graphic novel in that it's a send up of all the superhero traps and tropes, and it's done very freestyle. Nicole Stevenson, I'm forgetting her name. It's an excellent book, but I read drama. I read
it's
Nimona,
Noelle Stevenson, isn't it?
Noelle Stevenson. Noelle Stevenson. Just a terrific reimagining for me, a reimagining of all the graphic novels I had seen, in that it's so loose. It's funny as heck,
right,
which I adore. I love humor. But it's also very loose. I mean, the handwriting, the lettering is just sort of somebody's handwriting. The art itself is very loose, but what a wonderful twisting of reality. It's kind of like what Memento did for film. For me, it just reinvented the whole thing.
Yeah, well said. I think that's it is a very interesting piece of work. And
yeah.
Ile, what are you reading at the moment? Have you got any books that you'd recommend outside of your own work?
Well, I was working on something that I cannot speak about.
Of course. Yeah.
That
is a very familiar answer, by the way, so don't feel bad about it. That's what everyone says.
Yes, no, I was reading, but I was reading books. I don't know why I suddenly got into this series. The first one is called Rivers of London.
Oh, yeah, well, we published Ben Aronovich. It's fantastic work. We published the comics for Ben. So our publishing division, Titan, we have a whole comics and books imprint, and we published the Rivers of London comics. If you check out where this interview will be, there's a couple of chats with myself and Ben talking about Rivers of London. That's a great piece of work. It's really super entertaining. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great choice. How about yourself, Ridley? You know, I mean, you're super prolific, but I guess you must have your favorite authors as well.
Oh yeah, I just read a book by Patrick Keefe called Say Nothing, which is about the Troubles in Ireland. Phenomenal history of the Troubles. I thought I knew about the Troubles until I read this book. And that completely redid things for me. I read a wonderful book called Six of Crows, and I'm going to forget her name, a huge author right now. And it's just brilliant, Andrew. It's told from like 5 different points of view. It's kind of a YA fantasy adventure. I think they're making a film out of her other series. Bardugo is her last name.
Right, got it. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and unbelievable book. That one's had a huge impression on me. Right now, I'm reading a history of. It's sort of a anthology of the leadership qualities of some American presidents, written by Doris Kearns Goodwin, called Leadership. And it's a fantastic book.
And when you're in a leadership vacuum, that must be a fascinating thing to read. Yes. Actually, yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. I think that's why she published it. And it's what's remarkable is how dysfunctional, how similarly dysfunctional the early years of some of our presidents were. I mean, reading this, you just go, you've got to be kidding me. How did these people ever get out of an institution, given the way they were brought up? And yet they turned out to be some of the greatest people in American history. So we all can overcome our, disabilities. We just got to keep pushing.
Here, that's so true.
Yep.
And guys, to end on, what are you both working on at the moment? Separate, individually, together? Is there anything you can tell me about?
No, I can't.
No, that's okay. Don't feel bad.
I have just, I've been given the most wonderful opportunity, Andrew. I pitched DC original content for a series of graphic novels, and they took it. So we're just finishing the 3rd book of a series called Indestructibles, which brings new characters to the DC world and is a 3-book middle grade series. I couldn't work with Ile because she was still working on Super Sons. So I'm working with a Brit, actually.
Oh, really?
Bharat, and he's just phenomenal. I miss Ile, but I certainly am honored to be working with Bharat, who is doing just a beautiful job on these books. And the first comes out, I think, next August. So I'm really excited about Indestructible.
Oh, that sounds well. You must come back and speak to us about that, Ridley.
I'd love to, and we'll get Bharat on too.
Yeah,
I've never met.
Fantastic. Well, we'll make sure it happens here. And Ile, when you can talk about what you've got coming out. We'd love to see you again, and keep us posted with what you're working on. The artwork on Super Sons is just really beautiful, and you should be very proud of it. I'm glad that you guys have had such a great time creating these books, because I think they're so meaningful to young comic book fans, and that entry-level comic book reading habit is, as we talked about earlier on, it's a very important thing to foster, and I think it's what you do wonderfully with this series. So thanks so much for sharing the time.
Super Sun series, so we'll see that happens.
I mean, that will be, fingers crossed, big time. Here. I would love to see that. I would love to see that.
Thank you, Andrew.
So this has been FPTV New Releases. We've been talking with Ile Gonzalez and with Ridley Pearson about the epic 3-part graphic novel series Super Sons. You can order from the links here. You can order a signed mini print edition of all 3 books, and it's really fantastic. There's the sign, there's the signatures right there, and it's really awesome comics. So buy them and enjoy them. Great to see you guys. Thank you very much for spending so much time with us.
Thank you, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.
Take care of yourselves. See you soon.
Bye.